Hello and welcome to Connect. I'm your host, Randy Shabilo. On today's show, we'll have Professor Mark Rosentraub from the University of Michigan talking about the Downtown Event and Entertainment District. And as always, we'd like to connect with you. Follow us on Facebook at ConnectYXE, catch past interviews on YouTube, email us at connectyxe@gmail.com, or leave a message at 306-665-3796. Saskatoon's Downtown Event and Entertainment District, or DEED, has been under the works of Council and some of the advisory group for some time now. We have Professor Mark Rosentraub from the University of Michigan here. He's been in town talking about his experience over a number of years in developing districts like this, and want to invite you and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to come down to the studio.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying I've been involved for a few years. That's in my case.
That could be decades, but
few is yes. I have to concede the fact. Yes, it's 40-odd years I've been doing this kind of stuff.
Isn't that something? Well, anyway. Maybe hone in on that. How did you get involved in the university, and as a professor, you have a background in finance and urban planning?
So my PhD focused on public finance and urban planning. Got my PhD in '75, and at that point, there was a big change happening politically in the United States, where Ronald Reagan, when he became president for the first time in '80, began to phase down what was called revenue sharing. And what's meant by revenue sharing is that even as some cities, wealthier people had moved out, the federal government was going to transfer some money to the cities so that they would kind of balance their budgets. Losing wealthy people, you lose property taxes, you lose sales taxes, you lose income taxes, but if the federal government is going to kind of level it out, everything was okay. Well, Reagan began the process of trying to reduce that, in part because that was the beginning of the stress on the federal government on financing Medicare and financing Social Security. So they had to cut back someplace to cover for their other expenses. That meant cities were going to be dependent on what we call own source revenue. So the question that was posed, that was emerging for everybody, was, okay, with all this decentralization to the suburbs, et cetera, how does a city even retain economic development? And so we went into a lot of different analyses, theoretical positions on that. One of the things that began to surface was that the one element that a city could have that no other city could duplicate was sports. Because sports essentially is a cartel. If there's one team that's going to be in a region, there's not going to be a second. So if we could get that team in the central city, despite the fact that the wealthier people might be moving to the suburbs, they would still come and spend their money downtown. That would mean we'd have more restaurants, which would elevate property taxes, et cetera. So my focus on sports was not because I was some kind of elevated sports fan. And as I tease a lot of my students, I wished what drove people back to cities was classical music. Unfortunately, that doesn't sell as many tickets as does baseball. So that's when we started getting into this issue of, okay, we could move economic activity if we moved the teams down. But if we just moved the teams, that wasn't enough. We needed to do more, and that got us into the urban planning of these kinds of districts. And we began postulating what this could look like. The first city that really began thinking about it to bring revenue down was Indianapolis. They started doing it, but a team didn't do it by themselves until the San Diego Padres in beginning of 1998, finished in 2004. The success of the ballpark district, notice now it's called district, It's not just the downtown area. They literally created, just like you're talking about in Saskatoon, a defined district. They would use tax increment financing so that taxpayers didn't pay for it. It all came from this new district, which was a new neighborhood that was going to be developed. John Moore's ended up, the value of the real estate today is estimated at about $11 billion.
Just in that district?
Just in the district. What he did, though, was that he just built and sold. He didn't have any interest in keeping it. So he doesn't own any land or anything. He sold everything, eventually sold the team too. Bottom line is, when he finished selling everything, grossed about $3.5 billion. Well, once you found out that you could make these districts and make some money, then every team started doing it. And so now you start seeing it as a prescription that we could actually do these kinds of things, and it will generate enough revenue that it doesn't actually fall, the burden doesn't fall on the taxpayers. So one of the issues we try to do when we begin to frame this as infrastructure, just like you build a turnpike, you have a toll. You build a bridge, you have a toll. You build a highway, you have gasoline taxes. That's what pays for it. It's not assessed on everybody else. Could we get that much development around it? That's when we get into this whole aspect of building what's called absorption models. How much real estate could we develop? Every team, every event center is now based on that sort of concepts. The issues for Saskatoon are exactly as they would be for San Diego, for Los Angeles. It doesn't matter. People say, well, we don't have a Major League Baseball team. We don't have an NFL team. Neither does Fort Wayne, Indiana. But Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is about the same size as Saskatoon, plus minus 10,000, they've got minor league baseball. Actually, they have A-level baseball, which is let's call it the fourth division of baseball, professional baseball in the United States. So they have the bottom rung. They have an A-level team. They also have a NBA development team, not an NBA team, but what's called the D-League. They built an arena and a ballpark to revitalize their downtown. And that's what it's really about. It's about building an exciting downtown that offers competition. People that like to enjoy sport. And yes, it would be a lot better if the Yankees played the Red Sox, but you can actually have an A-level game involving the lowest level, but it's a competitive game. And you create this kind of fan experiences, et cetera. So the model works. It works at the major league level or the professional level. It'll work in Toronto. It'll work in Edmonton, and we can talk a lot more about Edmonton and Calgary and what they're doing nearby. But I always want people, don't get focused on the fact that they have the NHL and therefore we can't do it. Now, you could have lacrosse, you could have the Canadian Basketball League. As long as the games are competitive and fans have a good experience, that's why they come. They come for the experience. They don't come necessarily for the star play. And some of these younger kids are going to be the star players, and people enjoy it. So it works when we're in a population center of 300,000. I'm working on another project at a city, can't mention it for the confidentiality issues, but it's a town that's probably half the size of Saskatoon. They're also building a ballpark and an entertainment district with an A-level team in a town that I would be shocked if anybody watching this program, if I mentioned it, would even know that town existed. But they're doing exactly the same thing because they are distant from, a couple hours away from a major city, but they want to do the things that, as we talk about, attract human capital, create a place where young people want to live, give them the downtown experience, build up the restaurants because there's crowds coming in. That's what these entertainment districts do.
Can you talk about how people will get there? Because as a car culture,
right,
mostly here in Saskatchewan, we want to drive up and park right there in front of the doors and not have far to walk, and it's minus 25 outside.
Right.
How do you see 15,000 people coming into a downtown area with limited parking or not that much?
So when we start thinking about transportation, just like when we're thinking about the entertainment industry, where we say, well, we already have an arena, why do we need something? Well, and we can get into a little bit of how the entertainment industry has shifted. If we started having serious conversations about this car culture, how do you think cars are actually going to operate in the next 10 or 15 years? And so when I talk to automotive engineers or talk to like Ford Motor Company about where they're seeing their industry 10 to 15 years from now, yeah, your car's going to come to downtown, but you know where it's going to go when it drops you off? It's going to go home by itself because you'll tell it where to go. And so when we start thinking about all the transportation issues and linkages and how we're going to do that, we also have to take into account how the car industry is going to be developed. And when I start talking about self-drive cars, everybody says, well, what is it, like the Jetsons? The guy's crazy. I would say, okay, so if I told you 7 years ago that 5–10% of the population is going to have a car that never goes to a gas station, you would have said, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Well, guess what? 7–10% of the population is not going to a gasoline station, and they're still driving cars. And people say, well, you know, here in Canada, we're not doing it. And I was teasing somebody. Last week, Ford announced that they're going to change all the plants in Hamilton to an e-car. So, like it or not, Canada is about to become the largest North American producer of e-cars because Ford's moving their entire passenger e-car, not the Lightning.
Right.
Everything else is going to Hamilton. So that changeover is in 24. You'll be producing e-cars in 25. Get used to them because you're about to become the biggest exporter in North America. You're going to outpace Mexico, which is right now where the largest ones are. The next innovation coming behind the e-car is the self-drive car. So your answer to your question, long-winded? Yeah, all we need is a lane to drop you off because the car's not staying. So we don't need a parking structure. When we did, I had the opportunity and the honor to work on Allegiant, which is the new home of the Las Vegas Raiders, came from Oakland. We had this very big debate. How many parking structures should we build? My answer was 0. Because within the first 15 years of that facility, people aren't coming by cars that they need to park.
So it's not about today, it's about the
right.
future.
And remember, even if we left this telecast right now, walked out the door, and as soon as you walk out the door, Saskatoon says, we're going to do the arena. It would take them another year to 2 years to plan. We'd have another year to do construction documents. We could start putting shovels in the ground probably in 4 years. Then it would take 30 months to build. So we're now out 6 years from now. Then we're looking at something that's going to operate for 25 years. So what we're actually talking about is how transportation is going to change over the next 30 years. As I tell my students, don't bet on the over, bet on the under. Those self-drive cars are going to be, your grandchildren will never know a time period when people had to drive cars. Now, they could drive them if they like to, but you could also just read a newspaper and let the, actually you won't read the newspaper, you'll actually just look at your phone.
We're just going to take a quick break here and come right back and do part 2 of our Downtown Event and Entertainment District with Professor Rosentraub. Stay with us.